Raising a child with special educational needs or a disability comes with many extra challenges. Today, a group of parents in Bristol are taking the City Council to the High Court over its decision to cut spending for children like theirs by £5 million.
It's the first case of its kind, but at least 2 other councils will soon face similar challenges. Breakfast's Jane McCovin has this report.
Local authorities are feeling the heat of falling budgets and rising demand for services, especially when it comes to the support of children with special educational needs. Like Kian, who has ADHD and autism.
It was really hard to focus and concentrate and stay in lessons for a certain amount of time in school beforehand.
But now you're doing really well.
Yeah.
Kian wants to work here on the steam trains, and right now he's working towards his GCSEs. But the one-to-one support and speech and language therapy which make that possible is costly. And his council, Surrey, says it has to make savings of £21 million on its SEN budget, a move the family will soon fight in the High Court.
If they don't have the funding in mainstream schools, then the teacher in a mainstream school is left with, say, 28 children and 2 with SEN. The 2 with SEN don't get the support, so that teacher has to direct the time for the 2 with SEN to keep them, to help them understand, to maybe help with the behaviour, that kind of thing. And all the children lose out.
Surrey Council said, "We are defending this claim. Our main focus is making sure children get the support they need." But that judicial review is one of 3 going to the High Court this year. The first will be heard here in Bristol today. A court order means we can't identify the family behind that challenge.
One of my boys has missed a whole term, bar 6 days, because his additional needs aren't being met, because they haven't got the funding to meet them, and it's a sad, scary place to be.
And you know that Bristol has the worst exclusion rate in the whole country. In primary school and secondary school. What does that tell you?
That we need funding for our children.
Not cuts.
Not cuts, no.
Bristol is one of 39 local authorities which have signed this letter to the Secretary of State for Education. It says they are deeply concerned by a lack of adequate SEND funding and far-reaching reductions to provision. That letter has also been signed by Hackney.
No cuts for SEN.
Their protests have been held in the face of cuts to tackle a £6 million overspend. Their parents are also taking the council to the High Court. But now that council is considering a legal challenge of its own, a judicial review against the government. You are having those conversations right now?
Yes, we have to, with other councils, about possibly taking the government to court.
What would that look like? How would you do that?
Well, it would look like the 27 out of the 32 London councils, who between them are 100 million overspent, JRing the government because the government isn't giving us the funds we need.
The Department for Education told us we recognise there are pressures on high needs budgets, and that is exactly why funding is rising to £6 billion this year, the highest on record. But medical advances and better diagnosis means that demand for services is rising at an even faster rate. These are thought to be the first legal challenges to broad SEN cuts. They are unlikely to be the last. Jane McCovin, BBC News.
And Jane will actually be here tomorrow with more on this issue on the programme, and when we'll discuss with an Education Committee report looking at an increase in SEND exclusions from mainstream schools.
How has it come to this, that mothers like that are having to go to the High Court to get support for their children?
Well, local authorities have to make the decision as to how they spend the money for children with special educational needs. We've actually increased the budget. So the budget this year is £6 billion. It was £5 billion in 2013. We've also made available about 140 million additional investment, as well as a 265 million in capital to increase the number of places. So in Bristol, which you mentioned, this year they're getting 51 million. In Hackney, they're getting 42 million, and in Surrey, they're getting 142 million. They're also inspected now. So we've made probably the largest, most ambitious change in terms of the legislation and how we look after children with special educational needs. 340,000
Right,
children now have.
Thank you so much. Thank you for telling us about
education, health and care plan,
Right.
which I just wanted to. So it's the local authority that has to decide how those children actually receive the
Right.
best possible support with their needs.
Right, so thank you very much for telling us. I mean, and these sound like an extraordinary amounts of money, but we've been covering this story for some time here on Breakfast, and it is clear that the families are not whatever the numbers are, getting the help they need. What can be done about it, and done about it for soon?
It's a very good question. So the way the system works is now that children have an education, health and care plan, local authorities are inspected by the CQC and Ofsted. We've had 63 inspections. 35 local authorities have been found to be doing a really good job. So Leeds, for example, Wiltshire, doing a very good job for their children and their families. Unfortunately, in areas like Surrey, they have been found to be wanting, and they've had to have a written statement of action. 28 other authorities, or 28 in total, have required a written statement of action to improve their services. And we will continue those inspections. I've written to Ofsted to say this is not the end of the process. Right. This is the beginning of the process, so that we make sure that the child's needs are at the heart of this, and quality is what we go after.
Are you saying then that it's the councils, in your view, that are not spending the money properly?
Well, no, look, I can't comment on specific cases. So Hackney actually has had a good inspection. Bristol hasn't been inspected, and Surrey's had an inspection where they've required a written statement of action, which means they have to improve. I don't know the specific cases that you have highlighted today, but it is important that we listen to parents, which is why we've got the parent forums, and it's important that we put the child at the heart of our reforms, which they are. I think most practitioners, most stakeholders in this area would agree that the EHC plans is the right way forward, but it's the beginning of the process, not the end of the process.
Well, you mentioned those plans. You mentioned the EHCP plans. The chair of the Education Select Committee has told us that policy is not adequately funded.
Look, I review and look at funding all the time. All I can say to you is, if you look at the numbers, £6 billion a year is now being spent on children with special educational needs and disabilities. I've made available another 140 million this year, and I will continue to keep a close eye and review the funding pressures on these local authorities. And I'm not going to sit here and arrogantly say to you there are no pressures. Of course there are pressures on the system, which is why we review it all the time. All I would say is the local authorities that are doing well, like Leeds, like Wiltshire, we have to learn from them and spread the good practice across the country.
Right. When might you have a result of this review?
I review all the time. This isn't it's not. I look at the funding pressures. We've got obviously a spending review next year, and I've got to make sure that my department understands where the pressures are, what good practice looks like, which local authorities are doing really well for those children, and how we can spread good practice.